The trouble found me before I understood what I was looking at. It came the moment the bank manager leaned in close, his breath tight, his hand trembling as he slid the paper back to me across the counter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around. He just pushed it toward me slow, his fingers shaking like the page carried something dangerous. "Ma'am, please don't sign this," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "I can't say more than this." Marble stepped in fast. Her hand landed on my wrist, soft on the outside, firm underneath. She didn't give the manager a full look. She kept her eyes locked on me, like she didn't want him to finish what he was saying. "Mama, it's fine," she said, voice warm enough for strangers, but cold underneath. "It's just that bill form we talked about. Sign, so we can go." Rodney stood by the glass door, shoulders tight, tapping his foot like he was timing something. He kept glancing outside, then back at us, then at his phone. His eyes never met mine. The kind of nervous that isn't about being nervous, just waiting for a signal. The manager swallowed hard, stepped back only an inch, and kept his palms pressed to the counter. His eyes stayed on me, like he hoped I could hear what he wasn't allowed to say. Something in the tight space between his words dragged, heat up my neck. My heart pushed slow and heavy, the way it did the day my husband sat on the edge of our bed and said, "Keep those papers close, Danica. Don't let nobody rush you." His voice floated through me just long enough to make my fingers pause over the pen. Marble squeezed my wrist again. "Mama, please," she murmured. "We don't have all day." Rodney shifted louder than necessary, clearing his throat and pulling the door halfway open like he expected to walk out the second I finished. His hand shook. He shoved it into his pocket before anyone else noticed. The paper waited in front of me. I didn't know the words. I didn't understand the form. I only knew my children wanted me to sign, and the manager wanted me to stop. I looked at him one more time. His jaw flexed, his eyes begged, but Marble's grip tightened, and I let the pen touch the line. The moment the ink hit the page, she snatched the paper quick, folded it once, slipped it into her purse, and smiled at the manager like nothing unusual had happened. She walked ahead before I even capped the pen. I introduced myself as we stepped outside, because stories like this don't start gentle. "My name is Danica Henderson," I said under my breath. And this was the morning my world shifted without warning. 2 hours passed. 2 hours of quiet. 2 hours of pretending nothing felt wrong. 2 hours before everything snapped open. The alarm hit like a slap, sharp, sudden, metal screaming through the bank walls. People stopped and turned. A flashing red light cut across the floor. A voice shouted for staff to clear the area. My chest tightened. I stepped back inside on instinct, and the manager rushed forward, eyes wide, barking orders I never heard from him before. Marble stood frozen, but only her body was still. Her face told a different story. A tight flicker of panic shot across her eyes. Quick, sharp gone. She hit it fast, but I saw it. Rodney pressed himself against the wall, breathing too fast, eyes darting between the back room and his sister. Security moved past us, keys jangling, unlocking the steel door that led to the safe deposit room. The air shifted as the door swung open. I followed without thinking, pulled by something I couldn't swallow down. A guard yanked a drawer open hard enough for the metal to ring. The camera above blinked to life, pointing straight at what sat inside. My husband's old leather case, the one he told me never to let out of my hands. Everything inside me went still. Drop a heart in the comment. The bank doors locked behind us before I could catch my breath. A loud click echoed through the lobby, followed by the manager's voice telling everyone to stay where they were. People froze mid-step. A child started crying. A woman clutched her handbag to her chest. Lights kept flashing against the walls, washing everything in sharp red pulses. My heart dragged against my ribs as I stepped deeper inside, watching the room change shape around me. Marble didn't look at me. She didn't look at the manager either. Her eyes stayed fixed on the security cameras mounted in the corners, studying them like she needed to see what they were seeing. Her fingers kept touching the strap of her purse, tapping, scratching, pulling. Soft movements, but too steady to ignore. Rodney moved the opposite way, fast, jittery, too loud. "We should sit down, Mama," he said, voice tripping over itself. "They just doing their job. It's nothing, just a false alarm. Happens all the time." He said it like he'd rehearsed it, like he needed me to believe it before he even believed it himself. The manager stepped out from behind his desk with a firmness I hadn't seen before. He didn't look at Marble or Rodney. His eyes found me first. Then he glanced at the item resting on the counter, a small, worn piece from my husband's old stash. Something that should have been in our home, nowhere near this bank floor. My throat tightened. Rodney's foot started bouncing, a wild tap, tap, tap against the tile he tried to cover by shifting his weight. A teller behind the counter looked up, saw Marble, and immediately looked down again, too fast, too guilty. She fumbled with her drawer and pretended to stack money, hands shaking. It wasn't fear of the alarm. It was fear of Marble, fear of being connected to something she didn't want to explain. The manager approached me without calling attention. He passed by like he was heading toward the back room, but when he reached my side, he slipped a folded printout against my palm with a motion smaller than a breath. One line on it stood out before I even unfolded it. A timestamp. This morning, hours before I came in. A transaction tied to my account. I folded it back quick, sliding it into my coat pocket before Marble turned her head. She glanced in my direction once, but her attention snapped right back to the cameras. Her face held a look I couldn't read until I remembered how it changed when the alarm hit. That same flicker, that same crack in her mask. Security called out instructions. 2 guards rushed past carrying a key ring that jingled like warning bells. One bent to speak into his radio. Another pointed toward the safe deposit section, where the drawer had been yanked open minutes before. I caught the manager's eye from across the room. The look he gave me held weight, pressure without words, like he needed me to understand more than he could legally tell me. Rodney stepped close, too close, his whisper rushing hot against my ear. "Mama, don't listen to anything they're saying. It's some mix-up. Marble handled the bills. Remember? Let her talk to them." Marble didn't wait for permission. She walked up to the nearest guard with confidence she didn't have earlier. "My mother signed the form," she said, clear and calm. "Everything we touched is ours. You can check. Ours. Not hers. Not mine. Ours." The words slid across my skin like sand. The manager turned sharply at that. His jaw hardened. He opened his mouth to speak, but a guard called him over before he could get a word out. He followed, steps quick, shoulders tense. I moved toward Marble, but she stepped back just as fast, clutching her purse to her stomach like it carried something that might spill if she loosened her hold. Her eyes stayed neutral, but the corners of her mouth twitched, just once, enough to show she was scared of something being found. Then it happened. Her purse tilted as she shifted. The zipper slid half open. A folded slip tumbled out and hit the floor near my foot. I bent down and lifted it before she could. A pawnshop logo stared back at me. A date. A time. The exact 2-hour window. Marble's breath caught, sharp enough for me to hear it. And she stepped back like that little piece of paper could tip the whole room over. The bank felt heavier after the alarm stopped, like the walls were holding their breath along with everybody inside. Folks whispered in tight circles. Guards moved back and forth with clipped steps. Marble kept smoothing her purse strap even though her hand was shaking. Rodney stared at the floor like he hoped it would open and swallow him whole. The manager looked toward me once, then nodded his head toward his office door, small, quiet, and meant only for me. He didn't say a word until I stepped inside. He closed the door soft, careful not to draw attention, then pulled the blinds halfway. Not enough to hide us completely, just enough to muffle the outside eyes. His chest rose slow, like he needed to steady himself before he spoke. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, voice low, "there are things I can't say outright, but you need to see something." He slid a folder across the desk. It wasn't the same paper from earlier. This one looked thinner, like it had been printed fast. He didn't open it. He didn't explain it. He just held his hand over it for a second, pressing down like he was giving permission without breaking the rules that kept his job in place. I opened it slow. Inside were pieces, bits of transactions, times system logs. Nothing enough to accuse anybody, but enough to make my stomach dip. Every one of them had my account number on it. Everyone had a time that didn't match when I arrived that morning. I looked up at him, and the worry in his eyes told the rest. He wasn't protecting the bank. He was protecting me. He stayed standing, hands clasped so tight the knuckles whitened. I can't confirm who accessed what. I can't accuse anyone. I can only give you the pieces. His voice thinned. "Something happened before you walked in today. That's all I'm allowed to say." His words weren't long, but the truth sat between them like a weight. He was choosing a side, one quiet step at a time. Not by pointing fingers, not by shouting, but by giving me enough to understand the shape of the danger I was in. I folded the papers back inside the folder. My fingers felt stiff. My breath stayed caught in my chest. Nothing here gave a direct answer, but every line, every number, every timestamp led in one direction. Marble, Rodney, that signed paper, the 2-hour window. The manager hesitated again, then slid another slip of paper toward me, smaller, handwritten, folded twice. "Take this," he murmured. "Don't read it here." He straightened before I could respond. His voice rose to its usual level as he approached the door. "Now, Mrs. Henderson, let me walk you out so we can finish our report." He opened the door, for me, like we'd talked about nothing at all. The second I stepped out, Marble was there, eyes sharp, smile too even. "Mama, we should get home," she said. "You've had a long morning." Rodney hovered behind her, hands tucked in his pockets, shoulders stiff. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the manager. He just stared at the floor, blinking too fast. I walked past both of them without speaking. The manager kept a respectful distance, escorting us toward the lobby like everything was normal. But when he passed me the final look, soft and warning, I knew nothing was normal anymore. Outside, the air felt colder than it should. I held the folder under my arm tight, like it was keeping my ribs from falling apart. Marble and Rodney walked ahead, whispering just low enough for me not to hear. Their shadows moved quick, too quick. I didn't follow them home. I walked slow, giving myself space between each step. The quiet in the street pressed against my ears. A neighbor stood on her porch, the same one who always talked about weather and grandchildren whenever she saw me. Today she only nodded. No smile. No greeting. Her eyes slid away like she knew more than she wanted to admit, like she'd been told something she wasn't supposed to repeat. That alone tightened something deep in my chest. When I reached my front steps, I went straight to the drawer where my husband's ledger stayed. I opened it careful, expecting to see the same old pages he left me with. But one page was gone. The page with a code he'd written in his own handwriting. My fingers froze on the empty space. And the house, steady and familiar, suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me at all. I didn't sleep the night I found that page missing. My house felt wrong in a way I couldn't name, like somebody had walked through it with quiet shoes and careful hands. By morning, the air carried a strange stillness, the kind that settles before something else goes missing. I moved slow through my hallway, straightening the frame of my husband's photo, touching the corner of the drawer again, just to be sure. The empty space where that ledger page once lived pressed against my chest harder than any voice could. I heard Marble before I saw her. She was in the laundry room, rushing so fast the machine rattled against the wall. She never washed clothes this early. She barely washed at all unless she wanted something cleaned quick. I stepped close enough to see the clothes stuffed inside, a blouse and a dark jacket, and the smell rising from the damp fabric wasn't home. It was cold, metallic, the same scent that clung to the bank lobby the day the alarm went off. She slammed the lid before I could look any further. "Just washing some things, Mama," she said, breath short, eyes too wide. Didn't want the pile to grow. She left before I answered. I walked back to my room and opened my keepsake box, the one my husband told me to guard like it carried breath itself. The hinge creaked open and my heart dipped. The safe deposit key wasn't there. I moved the lace cloth aside, checked under the old letters, lifted every corner of the box. Nothing. The small gold key, the one my husband pressed into my hand the night he wrote that ledger code, was gone. Cold slid up my spine slow. I checked the dresser next, even though I knew I hadn't moved it. Then the nightstand. Then behind the headboard. The key was nowhere in the house. When I stepped back into the hallway, Rodney was standing by the kitchen door with his phone pressed close to his chest. His thumb moved quick. Too quick. I saw a flash of a message, just the top line, before he tilted the screen away. The words vanished as soon as he hit delete. He slid the phone into his pocket without looking at me, his breath uneven. "Morning, Mama," he muttered. There was no morning in his voice, only nerves. The house felt smaller each second, the walls listening, the floorboards holding secrets my children weren't telling. I walked into the living room and found a folded cloth on the arm of the couch, a cloth I hadn't put there. A smudge of lipstick sat on one corner. Marble wore bold reds and berry shades, bright colors that filled a room. This stain wasn't that. It was pale pink. Quiet. The kind of shade someone wears when they don't want to be noticed moving through a place they shouldn't be. I picked it up and held it close. That cold scent again. The bank. Marble walked in right as I lowered the cloth. Her eyes dropped to it, then to my hand, then to my face. Her smile snapped up too quick, too sharp at the edges. I thought I misplaced that. She said, "Thanks, Mama." She reached for it, but I didn't let go right away. The second our fingers touched, she tugged. Harder than she meant to. Hard enough to show she wanted it gone. She slipped into the kitchen before I spoke. Rodney followed behind her, whispering something low. I stepped closer, slow on purpose, letting my feet land soft on the tile, so their voices wouldn't break apart too fast. "Almost done," Rodney said. "Just next the title." My breath caught. Marble hushed him. Too late. She glanced over her shoulder, saw me standing there, and her face locked still. Before anyone could speak, a shadow moved across the living room window. A car rolled to a stop outside. Dark windows. Engine running low, sitting there like it had been waiting for the right moment. No one stepped out. No one honked. The engine hummed, steady and patient. Marble's eyes flicked toward it. Rodney's hand tightened around his phone. And my heart dragged slow in my chest, knowing whatever was happening wasn't anywhere near finished. I waited until Marble and Rodney left the house before I went back to the drawer where my husband kept everything that mattered. The morning light stretched across the floor, soft but cold, and I could feel a tightness sitting in the room, the kind that only comes when a truth is close enough to touch. I pulled the drawer open slow, letting the wood breathe. My fingers moved through the old envelopes, folded receipts, and the stiff corners of papers he told me never to lose. That's when I saw it. A thin folder tucked beneath the bigger documents. I had never seen it before. It wasn't old enough to be dusty, not new enough to stand out. It carried that quiet middle-aged look, handled but careful. I lifted it and felt weight settle into my chest before I even opened it. Inside was the clause. My husband's handwriting marked the top of the page, each letter steady and pressed deep into the paper. He wasn't a man who wrote long things. Every sentence meant something, and this one meant more than I knew he ever feared. He'd written a protection clause, one that kept the inheritance locked with me unless I willingly signed full control away, or someone proved I couldn't manage my affairs. My throat tightened. He never said anything this direct when he was alive, but I could hear him now, his voice quiet, warm, telling me he only wanted me safe. Below that was something else, a small envelope taped shut with my name on the front. No flourish, no decoration, just Danica, written the night he decided to prepare for a future he didn't want to see. I opened it slow. A small object slipped into my hand. Cold, solid, familiar. A key, but not the safe deposit one. This one belonged to the old lockbox he kept hidden behind his toolbox. The place he said was only for real emergencies, the same box neither Marble nor Rodney ever saw opened. I walked across the room, pulled the toolbox out, and found the rusted lockbox tucked behind it. The key fit like it had been waiting. Inside were copies, clear, notarized copies of every important document. The will, the clause, the account updates, even the safe deposit records. He had written short notes beside each one, all in that same careful handwriting. Quiet truths meant only for me. Everything lined up silently. Every missing piece I'd been stepping over clicked into place. The paper marble rushed me to sign. The safe deposit key gone from my box. The ledger page missing. The way the alarm hit 2 hours after my signature dried. None of it was random. My children weren't confused or overwhelmed. They were prepared. My phone buzzed on the table. I almost ignored it until I saw the name. My cousin. Someone who never called this early unless something was wrong. I picked up slow, still holding one of my husband's notes. "Hey, cuz," she said soft, her voice carrying the kind of tone you use with sick people. "Just checking on you. Marble told me you've been slipping, forgetting things, getting turned around." My heart stiffened. She kept talking, fumbling her words, trying to make the lie sound gentle. I let her speak until she ran out of breath. When she finally paused, she sounded unsure, like she'd expected me to match the story she'd been fed. "I'm fine," I said. My voice came out steady. Too steady. She hesitated. "Oh, okay. I just wanted to be sure." When she hung up, the silence in the room felt different. Not empty, heavy, the kind of heavy that comes when somebody tries to rewrite who you are without your permission. I sat at the table, placed the claws in front of me, and stared at my husband's handwriting until the truth settled into my bones. Marble wasn't just rushing me. She was building a story around me, a story she could use. I reached for my phone again and scrolled until I found the bank manager's number. My fingers hovered before pressing call. When his voice came through, calm but tired, I didn't waste time. "I need you to freeze my account." Silence followed. Not a long one. Not dramatic. Just long enough for fear to flicker through me before he spoke. "Mrs. Henderson, that's a serious request." I breathed in slow. "Do it." The pause he gave me next wasn't confusion. It wasn't hesitation. It was the sound of a man seeing how deep the trouble went. And the house around me felt like it exhaled while waiting for whatever came next. The manager didn't waste a second after my call. By noon, he phoned me back with a tightness in his voice I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, steady but strained, "your account is frozen. Nothing can move in or out until further review." He didn't explain the review. He didn't need to. The weight in his tone told me this wasn't routine, this was protection. The freeze hit my house before I even told Marble and Rodney. Marble was in the front yard talking sweetly to Miss Gloria from next door, smiling wide, hand on her back like she'd been checking on her all morning. "Mama's doing just fine," she said, voice ringing soft enough for the whole street to hear. "She just gets confused with papers sometimes. We're helping her with everything now." Miss Gloria looked at me when I stepped outside, but her eyes didn't hold the same warmth. They shifted away, quick and uneasy, like Marble's words were already settling in her ear. Marble noticed the shift too. Her smile widened, sugary and false. But the second Miss Gloria walked away, Marble's face dropped. Hard. She walked past me, like she couldn't stand the sight of me, her shoulder brushing mine with just enough force to make it clear. "We need to talk," she muttered. Inside. Inside meant cruelty. Outside meant performance. Rodney sat at the kitchen table tapping his fingers, staring at his phone like it owed him something. "Mama," he said, not looking up, "did you do something at the bank again?" "They called." Something about a freeze. Marble said, "Maybe you mixed up your papers." His tone wasn't worried. It was annoyed. like my account freezing was an inconvenience to him, not a danger to me. I didn't answer him. I walked past both of them, each step slow, each breath steady. I could feel Marble's eyes burning the back of my neck. She wanted control. She wanted urgency. But the quiet was mine now, not hers. By late afternoon, the shift in the neighborhood was visible. People who normally waved kept their hands stiff at their sides. Folks who always asked about my garden suddenly had somewhere else to be. A young mother across the street pulled her child inside when she saw Marble watching her from our porch. Every small gesture felt pointed, tilted, moved. Marble stayed glued to her phone, pacing, sighing loud, calling Rodney into corners of the house, and whispering sharp. I didn't try to listen. Their urgency already told me what I needed to know. My freeze broke something in their plan. When the sun dipped low, I stepped outside to take a breath. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the street itself was holding something back. That's when I saw him. A man stood near my gate, lean-build, black jacket, cap pulled low over his brow. He wasn't from this street. I'd lived here long enough to know every face, from the mailman to the teenagers who cut through the alley on weekends. This man didn't fit. He wasn't walking his dog. He wasn't waiting for a ride. He wasn't on a call. He was watching. I stepped forward. Not much. Just enough to let him know I saw him. His posture changed quick. Shoulders tensed. He dropped his gaze and turned, walking fast toward the intersection. Not a casual walk. A walk of someone who didn't want questions following behind him. I stayed outside a moment longer, letting the air settle around me. The night felt too quiet, too aware. When I stepped back inside, Marble and Rodney were still in the kitchen, both of them stiff as boards when they saw me. Marble snatched her phone, like she didn't want me to see the screen. I didn't speak. I walked to my room, opened my phone, and checked for anything from the bank manager. Nothing yet, but I didn't need a message to know something had escalated. The freeze had pushed whoever was involved to make a move. A minute later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No text, just a picture. I opened it. My breath left me slow and cold. It was a photo of one of my heirlooms, my husband's old silver pocket piece, listed for sale online, clear as day, with a price under it like it wasn't tied to decades of memory. The same heirloom that was supposed to be locked in my safe deposit box. The same box Marble and Rodney never had permission to touch. The picture sat on my screen heavy and final, and the room around me tilted into a new kind of silence. They weren't just moving fast. They were moving bold. The picture of my heirloom stayed on my phone long after the screen dimmed, sitting in my chest like a weight I couldn't shift. By morning, the quiet inside my house felt different, tight, charged, holding its breath. Marble and Rodney moved around carefully, speaking in low voices, watching me as if waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to forget something they could use. But the freeze had already changed the ground beneath their feet. Whatever they planned, it needed money, and money was no longer moving. I put on my coat and walked to the bank before either of them could ask where I was headed. The manager met me near the back hallway and motioned for me to follow. His face looked strained, but his voice stayed steady. "There are things I can show you," he said, "as long as I don't say what they mean." He led me to a small conference room with the blinds half closed. Once the door clicked shut, he spread a handful of receipts, slips, and system logs across the table. Not a full statement, not an official file, just pieces. The same way he'd helped me before, quietly, carefully, giving me just enough to see what he saw. I took a deep breath and leaned closer. The receipts formed a trail, one after the other. A courier charge from early morning. A pawnshop intake slip dated 2 hours after I signed the paper. Then a transfer fee. Then a cash-out line. Every timestamp sat in a straight line, no gaps, no confusion, no coincidence. Everything moved fast, too fast for a normal day, too perfect for an accident. The manager tapped the corner of one slip, his finger lingering without pointing. "This one moved first," he said quietly, and everything else followed within minutes. He wasn't breaking rules. He wasn't accusing anyone. He was showing me the shape of the truth. I nodded slowly, letting the pieces settle. Marble and Rodney hadn't panicked when the alarm hit. They panicked when the freeze landed, because whatever they were trying to clear out had been moving through hands all morning, and they were counting on speed. "Anything else I should know?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a final piece of paper across the table, an online marketplace printout with the listing for my heirloom. It wasn't the picture I'd received. This one had a username attached, a buyer account, not a real name, but I recognized the pattern in it. Some names stick out when they're around your children often enough. I folded the paper and thanked him. He didn't smile. He just placed a hand on the table, fingers pressed flat, like he was silently telling me to keep walking carefully. When I left the bank, the sunlight felt harsh. The street looked normal, but my steps felt heavier. I needed space to think, so I circled around the block before heading home. My mind ran through each slip, each timestamp, each movement. Everything pointed in one direction. My children weren't confused. They were coordinated. I stepped into the kitchen and headed for the pantry, needing something steady to hold on to. But when I opened the door, a brand new bag of groceries sat on the middle shelf, an expensive brand I'd never buy. Premium, imported, paid for in cash, from the looks of it. Marble didn't splurge unless she felt bold or careless. She wasn't bold yesterday. She'd been trying to move money fast. I pulled one of the cans off the shelf, turning it in my hand. It was heavy, slick with that same cold metallic smell that clung to things handled by people in a rush. Someone had put this here, recently, too recently. The floor creaked behind me. Rodney stood by the counter, arms folded tight across his chest. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just watched. His silence spoke louder than any lie he could tell. I set the can down slowly, keeping my breath steady. Later that afternoon, when Marble stepped outside to take a call, I slipped into the living room with the folded printout from the manager. The username on the buyer account sat in bold letters across the top. Something in my stomach twisted. I knew that name. It belonged to someone Marble spent time with, someone she trusted, someone who wouldn't have stumbled onto my heirloom by accident. My hands tightened around the paper. This wasn't random. This wasn't careless. My daughter knew exactly who she was selling to. The name on that buyer printout sat in my mind the whole night, turning slow and heavy like a wheel that had been waiting to move. Marble didn't slip when she used that account. She chose it. Someone she trusted. Someone she thought I'd never connect. But now that I could see the line between them, the next step wasn't anger. It was clarity. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask Rodney a single question. I needed them comfortable. I needed them thinking I was still in the dark. By morning, Rodney had changed his whole rhythm. He swept the living room before I woke. He tightened screws on cabinets that didn't need fixing. He followed me from room to room, offering to help with whatever I touched. Every move was too eager, too forced, dripping with guilt he couldn't swallow down. He didn't want to be caught. He wanted to look useful before the truth found him. That alone confirmed more than any receipt. I slipped my phone into my pocket and waited for him to leave the kitchen before opening the online marketplace app. My hands moved calm, deliberate. I took a picture of an old trinket, a piece of costume jewelry that looked valuable if you didn't know better. My husband once bought it from a flea market for $1. It shined enough to fool the eye. I listed it under vintage family heirloom. Quick sale. Not too expensive. Not too cheap. Believable. The listing wasn't up 5 minutes before the buyer account. The same one tied to Marble Circle sent a message. Available. I typed back. Yes. Another message came fast. Meet today? Cash. The speed told me everything. They weren't patient. They were scrambling. I stepped outside and walked down the block before calling the number the manager had written on a slip of paper weeks earlier. A private investigator. A quiet one, someone who worked simple cases fast and didn't talk more than necessary. When he answered, his voice carried the steady confidence of a man who'd seen too many scams to be surprised by anything. You sure you want to go through with this? He asked after I explained. Yes, I said. I just need proof. Clean proof. That I can get, he replied. Text me the meetup place when they confirm. When I returned home, Rodney was on his knees in the hallway wiping the baseboards with a rag. He'd never cleaned baseboards a day in his life. He jumped when he saw me, plastering on a smile too wide for his face. Just helping out, Mama, he said, his voice thin and shaking at the edges. I walked past him, letting the silence do what words couldn't. By late afternoon, the buyer sent the details. Crowded outdoor market on the East End, the kind of place where cash moved fast and no one asked questions. I responded with a simple, I'll be there. I texted the PI the location. His reply came quick, I'll blend in. When I arrived, the market buzzed with voices, vendors calling out prices, kids weaving between booths with sticky fingers and half-melted treats. I stood near the stalls selling antique things, old frames, dusty books, chipped glassware. The place where my fake heirloom wouldn't look out of place. I didn't wait long. A man in a gray hoodie approached, hands in pockets, head ducked low. He stopped a few feet from me and looked around before speaking. You got the piece? His voice was rough, impatient. Yes, I said, keeping my own voice steady. He stepped closer, just enough for me to see the way his eyes shifted, nervous, watchful, like someone had warned him to move fast. I opened my small pouch and let him glimpse the trinket. His shoulders eased a little. He reached into his pocket for cash. But before he could hand it over, a shadow fell across his back. A second man stepped behind him. Bigger, broader, face hidden under a black cap. He didn't speak. He didn't move forward. He just watched me with a stillness that pressed hard against my spine. The buyer stiffened, sensing him but not turning around. My breath thinned. Not fear, clarity. This wasn't just someone Marble knew. This was someone Marble trusted enough to involve. The trap was set, but I wasn't the only one who'd walked into it. The morning after the market, something in my house shifted. Marble and Rodney moved like shadows that didn't want to touch the light. They whispered in the hallway, fast, hushed, cutting their words short the moment my footsteps tapped the floor. Every time I walked closer, the air snapped tight, and their backs straightened like children caught doing wrong. They weren't planning anymore. They were scrambling. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I took my purse, locked my door behind me, and went straight to the legal aid office the bank manager recommended. The lawyer who stepped out to greet me wasn't loud or dramatic. She had that quiet, sharp confidence in her eyes, the kind that tells you she's brought bigger people than your children to their knees. "Mrs. Henderson," she said softly, "your bank manager gave me a brief heads up. Let's talk." We sat in her small office, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a stack of neatly arranged case files. I laid out everything. The freeze, the heirloom listing, the receipts with matching timestamps, the ledger page missing, the buyer who showed up at the market. I didn't cry, didn't stumble. I told it clean, steady. When I finished, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "This is more than suspicion," she said. "We can move fast." And she did. By noon, we filed for an emergency injunction, not a suggestion, not a warning, an immediate legal barrier that stopped Marble and Rodney from withdrawing, transferring, or touching anything tied to my estate. My lawyer pushed the papers through with a speed that made the young clerk at the courthouse blink. When the judge signed them, the stamp hit the page like a hammer. The injunction fell like lightning. My lawyer and I walked straight from the courthouse to the bank. Security let us into the back review room, and the manager had everything waiting: CCTV clips, sign-in logs, access records. He couldn't speak on motive, but he didn't need to. The footage played the truth in crisp detail. A woman in Marble's exact jacket walking into the safe deposit area hours before our appointment. A courier meeting Rodney outside. A bag passed between them. The truth wasn't hiding. It was sitting in plain sight. We printed screenshots, saved clips, logged timestamps. My lawyer packed everything into a file thick enough to make my hands shake when I held it. "This," she said, "is how your children lose control. Cleanly, legally." When I returned home, the house was too quiet. Marble stood by the stove, pretending to stir a pot that wasn't on. Rodney hovered near the hallway like he didn't know where to put his hands. They both turned sharply when they saw me, eyes flicking to my purse, then to each other. "You been out long?" Marble asked, voice stretched thin. "Handling things," I said. Her jaw twitched. Rodney swallowed hard. Later, while I stood in the living room pretending to read mail, I heard them whispering again. This time harsher, sharper. Marble hissed, "I told you to fix it." Rodney whispered back, "I'm trying, but she's moving different." The moment I stepped into the hallway, their voices clamped shut. Marble forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We were just talking about dinner, Mama." But guilt sits heavy on people who aren't used to carrying it. That night, a knock hit the door. Marble reached it first, smoothing her hair like she wasn't falling apart inside. A courier handed her an envelope. She pretended it was nothing, just paperwork, she said, but I saw the stamp, a medical logo. I waited until she left it on the counter and went to her room. When I opened it, My lawyer's words echoed in my head. Daughter submits fake notes. Inside the envelope sat a doctor's statement claiming I was experiencing confusion and memory lapses, signed by a physician I'd never met. They were building a case against me, trying to declare me incompetent, trying to replace me, trying to take everything. I spread the paper flat and stared at the bottom corner. Something didn't sit right. Not the signature, not the words. The stamp, the notary stamp, wasn't straight. It leaned crooked, like someone pressed it down fast before checking the angle. I held it up to the light. The edges blurred. The ink bled unevenly. Someone tried to make this look official, but the lie sat crooked, same way Marble and Rodney had been tilting their lives these past weeks. And that crooked stamp told me everything I needed. My lawyer didn't waste a minute after seeing the crooked notary stamp. She gathered every questionable document Marble and Rodney had pushed in front of me, forms, medical notes, authorizations, and slid them into a long envelope. I'm taking these to handwriting analysis today, she said. If they forged even one line, everything else collapses with it. By late afternoon, we were sitting in a small office downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and quiet truth. The handwriting expert, a calm, older woman with sharp eyes, spread the documents across her desk. She didn't rush. She didn't comment. She simply lifted each page, tilted it to the light, traced the lines with a thin metal stylus. Someone tried to match your handwriting, she said after a few minutes, but they didn't understand how your strokes land. She pointed to the loops on a letter. Yours curve inward. Then she tapped another sample. This one curves the opposite way. She lifted another form. Your signature drops on the last letters. Then she held up the forged consent. This one rises. The truth wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, undeniable. This isn't your writing, she said. Multiple documents were forged. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from relief, hearing a professional say out loud what my spirit already knew felt like something inside me settling back into place. My lawyer collected the evidence with the same steady hands she started with. This is enough to apply pressure, she murmured. Let's move. We returned to the bank with the new findings, and the manager met us in a review room reserved for internal matters. His jaw set as he pulled up digital logs, his fingers sliding across the screen to highlight entries that should have been impossible. Your account was accessed twice, he said, before the alarm ever went off. But the system shows your signature verified both times. He turned the monitor slightly. Timestamps, access approvals, locations. One of them came from a terminal across town, nowhere near me, and nowhere near the bank. The manager leaned in, voice low. Someone used a proxy system. That requires coordination. My lawyer nodded. Who was in the building that day? He tapped again. Names popped up. Staff. Vendors. Courier logs. That's when I saw it. A courier transaction tied to the same buyer account from the night before. A name. A time. And a freeze frame from CCTV showing the man passing through the hallway days earlier. The manager zoomed in on the image. The courier lifted a package. His sleeve slid back. And there it was, plain as morning. A watch. Not just any watch. The one I gave Rodney on his last birthday. A gold-trimmed face with a scratch across the bottom from when he dropped it at the church parking lot. A watch no stranger should have been wearing. My breath thinned. My hands tightened. Rodney hadn't just been involved. He'd handed my property to someone else and left proof on the man's wrist. My lawyer snapped a picture of the screen. This ties your son to the courier and the courier to the stolen items, she said. This gives us motive path and movement. The manager printed the logs. And this, he said, sliding out another sheet, shows the courier accessed the loading zone 5 minutes before your safe deposit records changed. Everything aligned. Everything pointed one way. Everything my children thought I would never understand sat in front of me in black and white. As we prepared to leave, the building suddenly felt too still. The kind of still that comes right before something breaks open. Back home, Marble and Rodney whispered in that same hallway again, sharp, frantic, corners of words slipping out like threads, unraveling. She's moving faster than we thought. I can fix it. You better, before someone knocks. And then it happened. A hard, sharp knock rattled the front door. Not gentle, not polite, not patient. I stepped into the living room just as Marble and Rodney froze, eyes wide, skin pale. Another knock. Firmer. Certain. My lawyer moved closer to the door, pulling a folder from her bag. Let me open it, she whispered. She cracked the door. A police officer stood there, holding a phone sealed in an evidence pouch. The screen was lit up, messages visible through the plastic. All from Marble, all instructing the courier, and he held it out like the final piece of a puzzle they tried too hard to hide. The police didn't say much that night. They didn't have to. The courier had already given them more than enough to start pulling the threads loose. Early the next morning, my lawyer called and told me the forger, the man who created the fake signatures, the fake consent, the crooked notary stamp, had been picked up. And he wasn't trying to be brave. He folded fast. By the time we arrived at the station, he was already sitting at a metal table, hands clasped tight, eyes swollen from a long night. He looked like a man who'd spent hours realizing the people who used him wouldn't stand beside him when it counted. The detective nodded to us before pressing record. The forger lifted his chin, breath shaky, but steady enough to push out the truth. She told me what to write. He said, every line, every date, every amount. He didn't stutter over who she was. He said Marble's name clean. He explained how Rodney brought the first form, how Marble followed up with instructions when they needed the handwriting to look more like mine, how she sent pictures of my old signature from documents she stole from my drawer, how she ordered the fake medical note to make it seem like I wasn't capable of understanding what I signed. He didn't defend himself. He didn't soften anything. He talked like a man trying to lighten the weight on his soul. She said it was just paperwork. He continued, said her mama wouldn't miss anything, said they needed the money before the bank flagged the account. My chest tightened as he listed dates, each one matching the receipts the bank manager had already shown me. He gave amounts, small transfers first, then larger ones, then the courier handoff. Everything moved in the same perfect chain. And then the detective pressed a button and played an audio file. Marble's voice came through the speaker. Firm, cold, in control. No mistakes this time. Do it fast. The old woman won't know the difference. We need that safe box cleared before the weekend. Her voice sliced through me like a dull blade, slow and painful. The forger closed his eyes. I kept everything. I ain't deleting nothing. I knew this would come back around. My lawyer leaned forward. Do you have more? He nodded and pulled out his phone, now logged as evidence, showing texts Marble sent the morning she dragged me to the bank. Use her name. Sign for her. Hurry. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no pretending. This wasn't an accident or desperation. It was theft, planned, executed, practiced. When the statement ended, the detective gathered the evidence with a slow, deliberate motion. Mrs. Henderson, he said, we'll move forward today. I nodded. My hands stayed still in my lap, but inside, something opened up. A truth I hadn't been ready to face finally settling where it needed to settle. The next morning was Sunday. I still went to church, not out of ritual, but because my spirit needed something solid to lean against. When I walked in, whispers slid down the pews like ripples on water. Some eyes softened with sympathy. Others watched me too closely, like they knew pieces of what happened and wanted to see how I held myself. Halfway through service, a woman 3 rows ahead lowered her phone after sending a text, then turned back to look at me. Her face carried a quiet warning, not pity, not judgment, just awareness. Something was shifting outside those church walls. I kept my head lifted, my breath steady, my heart quiet. Near the end of service, the doors opened hard enough to draw every eye. 2 officers stepped inside quietly, hats in hand, moving with a calm that didn't match the electricity in the room. They walked down the aisle with purpose, stopping beside Marble, where she stood between the choir pews and the communion table. Marble's smile, bright and rehearsed, fell so fast it looked like it slid off her face. Marble Henderson, the officer said, voice low but firm, "You're under arrest." She backed up 1 step, shaking her head, hands trembling so badly she knocked over a hymnal. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It was just paperwork. My mama, she didn't." The officer read her rights while the sanctuary went silent. Silent like truth itself had walked in. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Marble turned her head toward me. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She mouthed one line, soft, broken, trembling. "Mama, forgive me." But the officers were already guiding her out the door, the sound of her crying fading into the bright Sunday sunlight. And for the first time since this began, the truth wasn't whispering. It was talking loud enough for the whole world to hear. The courthouse felt colder than the air outside, that kind of cold that settles into the walls when truth is finally coming through the front door. By the time I walked in with my lawyer, the benches were already lined with neighbors, faces I'd known for years, faces that had watched Marble smile on porches and laugh in driveways. Today, those same faces sat stiff and quiet, waiting to hear the real story she'd been trying to bury under lies. Marble stood with her attorney near the front, wrists free, but shoulders tight. She looked smaller than she ever had, like the bright, sharp woman who once ordered men around the bank floor had cracked under her own weight. Rodney sat on the bench behind her. His foot bounced so fast the floor vibrated. He tried to hide it with his hand, pressing down on his knee, but the shaking only got worse. He knew what was coming. Guilt sat on him like a heavy coat he couldn't shrug off anymore. My lawyer placed our folder of evidence on the table. No theatrics, no speeches, just a clean, thick file, papers, screenshots, timestamps, signatures, CCTV stills. Every piece fit like gears in a machine that Marble and Rodney built with care, thinking I would never understand any of it. When the judge entered, Marble's breath hitched. Rodney leaned forward, eyes flicking up, searching for some loophole in the air. But there wasn't one left. The prosecutor began, reading each charge in a voice that carried across the room. Forgery. Marble flinched. Fraudulent authorization. Rodney's foot tapped faster. Financial exploitation of an elder. I felt that one strike like a dull thud. Conspiracy to commit theft. Marble closed her eyes. Use of a forger to create falsified documentation. Rodney stared at the floor. Each line landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples reaching every bench in the room. Then came the exhibits. The notary's stamp, crooked and bleeding ink around the edges. The fake medical note Marble submitted. The courier logs connecting Rodney to the exchange. The handwritten forms that the expert called deliberately altered. The screenshot of Marble's voice messages instructing when to move the items. The CCTV image of the courier at the bank wearing Rodney's watch. Marble's attorney tried to object, tried to argue misunderstanding, but each objection fell flat under the weight of proof. The judge's eyes stayed steady, his pen tapping a slow rhythm on the desk. Then the manager was called to the stand. He didn't speak with anger or nerves. His voice was even, careful, respecting every rule he lived by. He explained the timing inconsistencies, the early morning access, the emergency freeze. He didn't accuse. He simply confirmed the records. And with every clean, precise answer, Marble's shoulders curled tighter. The PI testified next, confirming the buyer rendezvous, the recorded interactions, the courier's confession. He handed over the audio clip of Marble's voice, cold, directive, unbothered. When it played, a low murmur rolled through the courtroom. Marble stared down at her, hands like they weren't attached to her body. Then it happened, the part nobody expected. The courthouse doors opened, and 2 deputies walked in carrying sealed bags. Inside them were my heirlooms, my husband's leather case, the silver pocket piece, the ring Marble sold to, pay for groceries she didn't want me to see. Each one logged, traced, and returned. The prosecutor placed them gently on the evidence table. A few women in the audience covered their mouths. Rodney's shaking foot finally stopped. He just sat there, staring at the items he helped take from his own mother. When all evidence had been presented, the judge leaned forward, folding his hands. His voice dropped low, not angry, not emotional, but final. Mrs. Henderson, he said, turning his gaze to me, given the severity of the actions taken against you and the evidence of coordinated fraud, you have the right to request that both defendants be permanently removed from your estate. A hush swept the room. Marble's head jerked toward me, eyes raw, tears pressing at the corners. Rodney swallowed hard, his hands tightening until the knuckles whitened. The judge held my gaze. Do you wish to proceed with that request? The weight of the question filled the room, heavy, undeniable, waiting for my answer. The courtroom didn't erupt when the judge returned Marble and Rodney's verdict. There was no cheering, no sigh of relief, no loud emotional swell. The truth had come out slowly, painfully, piece by piece. So when the final sentence landed, the room held its breath the way you do when something heavy finally settles after wobbling on the edge too long. Marble agreed to a plea before the trial moved any further. Her attorney whispered fast, eyes darting between the evidence table and the judge's stern face. Marble kept wiping her palms on her skirt, staring at the floor like she was looking for a doorway to crawl through. When she finally nodded, it wasn't bravery. It was defeat. "Your plea is accepted," the judge said. "Supervised probation, restitution, mandatory counseling, no contact unless authorized." She didn't look at me. Not once. Rodney's turn came next. He wasn't handcuffed, but he might as well have been. His lawyer tried to paint him as misguided, pressured, influenced, but the receipts, the courier logs, and the watch on that CCTV frame told a clearer story than any speech. The judge gave him probation, community service, and a restitution plan that would take him years to complete. Not because he was innocent, because his role wasn't as calculated as Marble's. But guilt still sat heavy on his shoulders, bending him forward like he'd aged overnight. By the time I stepped out of the courthouse, the sky looked washed clean, the kind of pale blue that arrives after a storm moves through. My lawyer walked beside me, quiet, respectful, letting the air settle. I'd won, not loudly, not proudly, but cleanly. The estate was secured. Every document Marble tried to twist was sealed under new legal protection. The freeze stayed locked until the judge approved a slow, monitored unfreeze under my authority alone. No one clapped for me, but I didn't need applause. I walked home with a slow, even breath, the kind you learn only after surviving something that tried to take everything from you. When I reached my porch, a neighbor stood there holding a covered dish. Someone I'd known 20 years, a woman who used to wave every morning when she walked her dog. Today her face was careful, eyes wide in that way people look when they're deciding whether to show sympathy or keep their distance. I heard, she said, "Thought you might need something warm." Her voice wobbled between kindness and uncertainty. She didn't know whether to hug me or set the dish down and run. The story had spread fast, but nobody understood where to place themselves inside it. "Thank you," I said softly. She nodded, stepped back, and hurried down the steps, glancing over her shoulder, once like she expected Marble or Rodney to appear behind me. Inside, the house felt too quiet, like it was waiting for me to breathe differently. I set the dish on the counter, slipped off my coat, and walked toward the dining table, the place where so much of this had started, the place where Marble first talked me into signing, the place where I once trusted my children without hesitation. Now, the table looked like something sacred had been returned to me. I could feel the tiredness deep in my bones, but not the kind that drags you down. The kind that comes after carrying something too heavy for too long and finally setting it down in the right place. I turned toward the hallway and stopped. There, on the table, lay a single folded note. No envelope, no name, just sitting there like whoever left it knew exactly where I'd see it. My stomach tightened. I stepped closer and unfolded it. 4 words, handwritten, sharp, rushed. "You took my future." The room went still. I felt someone watching me before I even looked up. And when I raised my eyes, Marble stood in the doorway, silent, pale, trembling, not arrested this time, not surrounded by officers, just standing there, waiting for me to react. Marble didn't say anything after leaving that note on my table. She just stood there, trembling in the doorway, waiting for something, an argument, a shout, a breakdown. But I didn't give her any of that. I simply folded the note once more, set it beside my keys, and walked past her without a word. Some lessons don't need volume. They need clarity. I called my lawyer that same night and told her I wanted to move forward with the trust restructuring, the same one my husband hinted at in the clause he wrote years before. Something designed to guard the estate even after I'm gone. Something Marble and Rodney couldn't break, no matter how hard they tried. By the next afternoon, the witnesses were gathered in my living room. Church members, 2 neighbors, the bank manager, still carrying that quiet, protective air. My lawyer sat at the table with a thick folder and a pen laid neatly beside it. The room hummed with a low tension, curiosity, sympathy, and the soft weight of unfinished business. Marble arrived last. She walked in with her head down, eyes swollen, breath shaky. Not the confident woman who once dragged me into the bank. Not the daughter who commanded rooms with her voice. Today she looked small, unsteady, wobbling under the truth she could no longer deny. No one spoke to her when she entered. No one had to. Her own guilt followed her in like a shadow. I stood at the head of the table, hands resting on the folder of documents my husband left behind. His handwriting on the clause seemed to glow under the afternoon light, clean and steady, proof he loved me enough to guard me from what he feared might one day happen. "We're here," I began, voice soft but firm, to put my husband's wishes exactly where they belong. My lawyer nodded and opened the file. She handed me the first page, the clause. I read it aloud, every line, every word he left behind. The witnesses listened in complete silence, the weight of the truth filling the room. When I reached the part that spoke of protection, protecting me, protecting the estate, protecting the legacy he worked for, Marble broke. Her breath hitched first, then her hand trembled, then the tears came, slow at first, then heavy, falling like the truth itself had cracked her open. "Mama, please," she whispered, voice shaking. "I made a mistake. I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean—" She choked on the end of the sentence. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't offer comfort, just held the papers steady in my hands, letting the moment do what years of warnings never could. One of the witnesses, a tall man from church with a calm, protective manner, stepped subtly closer to me when Marble's crying grew louder, like he wasn't sure whether she'd fall apart or lash out in desperation. Marble saw him move, and that alone pushed her to sit down, burying her face in her hands. My lawyer placed the new trust documents in front of me. "Whenever you're ready," she said gently. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. Not this time. I signed every line, clean, firm strokes that sealed the estate into a trust Marble and Rodney could never touch again. A trust run by a third-party trustee. A trust with community oversight. A trust that honored my husband, protected me, and secured a future they could no longer manipulate or steal. When the last page was signed, the room exhaled as one, the kind of breath that follows justice. Not loud justice, not public humiliation, but quiet, solid restitution. Marble lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Mama, please don't do this. I'm still your daughter." "I know," I said softly. "That's all. Nothing more." The rest of the lesson sat in the silence. My lawyer gathered the papers, closed the folder, and nodded at me with something warmer than approval, respect. As the witnesses began to leave, offering soft words and gentle pats on my shoulder, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. I reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting my lawyer or the bank. But when I unlocked the screen, my breath caught. A new text. No name attached. Just a number I didn't recognize. And one sentence. She wasn't working alone. The dedication room wasn't big, but it felt full. Full in that quiet way that comes when people gather out of respect, not spectacle. Soft murmurs, warm handshakes, low humming from the choir loft upstairs. No cameras flashing. No reporters waiting outside. Just community steady and present, honoring a legacy that almost slipped through my fingers. The banner hanging across the front read, "The Henderson Community Fund, in honor of Robert Henderson." Seeing my husband's name printed that way almost made my knees go weak. Not from sadness, not from memory, just from the relief of knowing everything he built was finally safe. Not in my children's hands. Not at risk. Protected. Intact. Living on. I stood near the podium, fingers smoothing the edge of the small plaque the board had given me. Around me, neighbors whispered to each other about the scholarship applications, the school supply grants, the repair fund for aging homes. The good this money could do. The good my husband would have been proud of. Then Marble walked in. She stayed at the back, hands clasped tight, eyes lowered. The probation monitor stood beside her, a reminder of the consequences she couldn't outrun. Rodney sat 2 rows behind me, stiff, trying not to draw attention. Neither of them approached. Neither spoke. It wasn't their day. It wasn't their place. And I didn't look their way. Instead, I stepped to the podium and spoke a few small words about my husband, his work, his heart, the quiet kindness he carried in his pockets like loose change. People nodded, some wiping their eyes. I didn't mention the theft, the forgery, the lies, or the nights I cried into the side of my pillow so my own children wouldn't hear. That story was already written. Today belonged to something better. When I stepped down, the bank manager approached, holding something wrapped in brown paper. He'd been standing off to the side all morning, respectful, warm, the same calm presence he had the day he warned me without saying too much. "I thought you should have this," he said quietly. I opened the wrapping. Inside was a small framed copy of the freeze order. The timestamp, the signature, the notation, "Emergency hold pending investigation." The document that stopped Marble and Rodney from draining everything before the truth caught up. The paper that saved my life's worth. The moment the tide turned, the bank manager looked me in the eye, not with pity, not with sorrow, but with a steady pride that almost made me tear up. "You did everything right," he said, "even when it was hard." I held the frame close to my chest. "Thank you," I murmured. 2 simple words, but heavy with meaning. The ceremony ended softly. People filed out in small groups, murmuring blessings, squeezing my hand, patting my back, wiping their faces as they passed by Marble and Rodney without a second glance. The consequences had settled in. Their silence said everything: respect, disappointment, boundaries. As I stepped outside, the sun felt warm on my skin, the kind of warm that feels like a door closing behind you and another opening just ahead. I walked to my car alone, but not lonely. That day, I didn't need applause or noise or justice shouted from rooftops. What I gained was quieter than that, truer. At home, I unlocked the door, walked inside, and set the small framed freeze order on the mantel. It stood straight, clean, and final. Then I turned the lock on my front door. A small click, simple, strong, enough. I let out a breath that came easy for the first time in months. Quiet victory. Quiet peace. Quiet but mine.